Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge and Meteorology 101 with Style. Today's episode in our tutorial series on World in Flames Collector's Edition is going to tell you everything you need to know about weather. Just like in the historical war, weather in a game of Whiff is going to have a major impact on your operations as well as just the general flow of the game. And so understanding how weather impacts what you're trying to do, as well as learning the patterns of weather that you'll see evolve over the course of the game, are key to really maximizing what you want to be able to do with your armies and giving you the best chance of success in the game. So what we're going to do is first take a look at a couple things on the maps, and then we'll get into the weather in a little bit more detail. Now, WIF divides the entire world up into 6 different weather zones: Arctic, North Temperate, Mediterranean, North Monsoon, South Monsoon, and South Temperate. And all of those weather zones are denoted by a border on the map. It's this sort of white line with these blue circles in it. If you follow along the border, you will see every once in a while they have boxes with the name of the weather zone in it. So in the example we're looking at here on the Pacific maps, you can see everything south of this line is the South Monsoon, whereas everything north, including the Maldive Islands, are in the North Monsoon zone. And if we follow this border up and along, you'll see it'll trace, and we'll come across another border here that extends here. As we work our way up into India, you can see the weather zone comes down this way and then works itself back up. And now we're looking at the Mediterranean zone. So you have the North Monsoon zone here. So I pull back a little bit, you can see we were originally looking at this area of the map. So all of this section of the map is the North Monsoon zone. Then we have the Mediterranean zone. There's a thin slice of it that works its way into India here. And then north of that, as you get into Afghanistan, along the border here, they can be a little tricky to see sometimes until you're used to looking for them. You can see that we get into the North Temperate zone. Now, the off-map sea areas are all labeled with the weather zone that they lie in. So in this case, the Cape Basin and Southeast Atlantic off-map sea areas are both the South Temperate zone. Any off-map hexes that border the sea zones will also be in that same weather zone. So in this case, the Southwest Africa is also in the South Temperate zone. You can see here, if I get the glare out of the way, that the Red Sea is in the Mediterranean zone. If you look at West Africa, it's a little more complex here. The sea zone for the Cape Verde Basin is in the North Monsoon zone. But you'll see that there is a border here around some of these off-map hexes. And we've got the Mediterranean zone here. So French Sudan, Algeria, these hexes are actually in the Mediterranean zone. And if you can just make it out, that weather zone border runs along the country border here, so that French Guinea is adjacent to the sea zone and is actually in the North Monsoon area. This is probably one of the little more complex weather zone areas you'll see as far as off-map areas go. That's why I wanted to kind of point it out to you. But that's basically how all of the off-map sea zones work. You'll see they're labeled here on the Americas map. Again, just like the other maps, you'll see the weather zone boxes and the borders laid out. One last thing to mention on the maps regarding weather, they've provided in the collector's edition this little box which is in the lower left-hand corner of the Americas mini map that lists all of the weather zones, and they've provided some chits with the various types of weather on them that allow you to place those chits in those boxes just as a memory aid to recall what the weather is in the different zones. Now, alternatively, I've seen people also take these chits and just place them in a more centrally located position in the weather zone. So if it's rain in North Temperate, say, they may just place that rain chit there where it's in view, but it's out of the way. Now, with that all said, let's take a look at the weather chart itself and see how weather actually works. All right, so we've placed reinforcements at the beginning of the turn. we've done the lending resources stage, and we've determined who has initiative and who will be going first. The side that goes first will be rolling for weather at the start of each of their impulses throughout the turn. So the effect is that the weather they roll will be in effect during their impulse and the other side's impulse. And then when it's their turn to go again, they have their next impulse, that's when they will roll weather. So it won't be one weather roll for the entire turn. It will vary from impulse to impulse. And to determine exactly what the weather is going to be, you're going to need the weather charts. And these are found on the player aids on the outside. You can see the chart. It's a fairly large chart, covers the whole half of the page. Up top in red here, the header divides the chart into 6 columns, one for each pair of monthly turns in the year. Down the left-hand side are the dice results. In order to determine weather, you simply roll 1d10, then cross-reference the die result with whatever monthly turn it is. If it's the May-June turn, you come down here and you see that it is showing F with a white circled 1. Now we've zoomed in here to give you a better look at the chart up close. And in our ongoing example, we had rolled a 9 in the May-June turn. And you'll see the box here, there are 6 Fs here. To the left here, you can see next to each of the die results, it lists each of the 6 weather zones. You come across, the way you read the chart is, when you roll a 9, the Arctic in May-June will experience F or fine weather. There are 5 different types of weather in the game: fine, rain, storm, snow, and blizzard. If instead of it being May-June, if it were January-February and you rolled a 9, you would see that the Arctic would have blizzard, the North Temperate and Mediterranean would both have snow, North Monsoon would be fair, South Monsoon would be storm, and South Temperate would have rain. Now, the white circle with the number in it indicates the number of boxes on the impulse track that the impulse marker will move up between each impulse. So not each pair of impulses, but each impulse. If, say, the Axis were going first in this turn, after their impulse in January, February, the marker would advance 3 boxes to the 4 impulse box. After the Allies went, it would advance another 3 to the 7 box, at which point the Axis would have their second impulse of the turn, and they would be rolling the die again to determine what the weather will be for that impulse and the Allies' next impulse. You'll see some asterisks here in some of the boxes, and there can be anywhere from a single asterisk up to 3 asterisks. That indicates that on the next weather roll, whether it's the next pair of impulses in this turn, or perhaps it's the first weather roll of the following turn, you will add a +1 to the die for each asterisk you see. So, going back to the 9 that we rolled in our example, if it's January, February, +2 indicates, the 2 asterisks would indicate a +2 to the next weather roll. Now, next to the weather chart in the upper right-hand corner is a box that lists all of the weather effects for the various kinds of weather. If the weather is fine, then there is no impact, no penalty on any operations in the game. Fine weather is great weather for you if you're attacking. Every other type of weather will have effects ranging from reducing the supply range to odd shifts on land attacks, making it more difficult to move, etc. For example, if it's rain in the weather zone, you'll see that the supply range is cut from its normal 4 European map hexes down to 2 European map hexes. For land units, all terrain costs are doubled. Land attacks suffer a -1 odds level, and your aircraft air-to-sea, tactical, and strategic factors are halved. Now, their air-to-air factors are not affected by weather. There's also a -1 shore bombardment if you're in a sea box section with an asterisk. And finally, there is a +1 to all naval search rolls, so it's going to be more difficult to find your opponent when you have rain and bad weather. Now, I won't read through all of these since you're more than capable of doing that yourself. However, one thing to note is that storm is kind of a worse version of rain, and blizzard is a worse version of snow. If you look closely at the effects of them, you'll see a lot of cases they are very similar, slightly worse with blizzard and storm. For instance, in rain, you will suffer a -1 odds level on all of your land attacks. In a storm, that becomes a -2. Similarly, with snow, you've got a -2 for your land attacks to your odds level, but in a blizzard, it becomes a -3. Now, for the most part, weather affects all terrain in all hexes the same. However, there are a couple of special terrain types where that's not the case, and I wanted to point those out to you. They are desert and desert mountain hexes. In those hexes, any results of storm become rain. Any results of blizzard become snow. And if you had rolled rain or snow, those are actually treated as fine weather. So you can kind of think of it as desert hexes, desert mountain hexes reduce the bad weather by 1 level. Another type of terrain, and there are very few of these hexes on the map, but it is a lake hex. And here's a good example of one up here next to Leningrad. Lake hexes become frozen in snow and blizzard weather, and they're treated as clear hexes in that case. Now, if any land or air units are occupying the lake hex when it becomes unfrozen, they are removed from the map. They're placed on the production circle to arrive as a reinforcement 2 turns later. Now, more commonly found on the maps are lake hex sides. And here's a good example here between 1349 and 1448, this hex side right here. Those lake hex sides also become frozen during snow and blizzard weather. They're treated as river hex sides. So normally in fine or rain weather, you cannot attack from 1349 into 1448. If it's snow or blizzard, this becomes frozen and you're treated as if you're attacking this hex across a river. Now, the last type of special terrain involving weather are iced-in ports. And there are a lot of them here on the Baltic Sea zone. Helsinki is a good example of one, and so is Tallinn. They have this little white jagged outline around the normal minor port or major port symbol. Now, iced-in ports are closed during snow and blizzard, which means no resources or build points can be transported through there. Also, overseas supply cannot be traced through there. And any ships and their cargo that are forced to return to base in that port are immediately turned face down and cannot be reorganized, even during final reorganization, where most things can be reorganized, but that's not the case in iced-in ports in snow or blizzard. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of how weather works in the game. And I don't want to overstate just how big an impact weather has in WIF. It affects all kinds of things, everything from the supply range to naval searching, even the naval combat type, because in storm and blizzard, naval air combat is not allowed. It affects land movement, invasions and shore bombardment, land combat, and air missions. And as an example, if you have rain, that 7-to-1 attack that you were planning on making now needs to be 8-to-1 because of the -1 odds level. On top of that, it's going to be that much harder to get that 8-to-1 odds because the air support you were planning on using is going to be halved due to the rain. So you've got to commit twice as much air power in order to get that same level of support you were counting on. It can really add up pretty quickly. And that's just rain. Storm, blizzard, your air forces are essentially grounded. The only thing you're going to be able to do with them is rebase them, but don't plan on any offensive actions with them. And that can have a major impact on how either a major offensive or a defense is going. And finally, perhaps the biggest impact weather has, it affects the length of the turn. And let me show you what I mean by that. Now, Here's the impulse track, and if you recall from our orientation video, we talked about how the number in the lower right corner of the box is the number needed to roll on a 10-sided die or less in order to end the turn. Now, the way weather impacts the length of the turn is if you have good weather everywhere, say you've got a fine result and it goes up just 1 in between every impulse, that means that the axis, first impulse, it will move up 1 to the 2 box, and then after the allied impulse, it will move up 1 more. Now, if you maintain that good weather throughout the turn, it's going to continue to move up 1 box at a time. And you can see that the NA indicates that the turn cannot end in any of the first 4 impulse boxes here. There's a -1 and a 0 in the next 2 impulse boxes, and the only way you can roll a -1 or a 0 or less is if one side passes entirely, giving the end of turn die roll a -2 modifier. So in this case, the axis will get 1, 2, 3. They'll get 4 impulses in that turn before there's even a chance that the turn is going to end. And there's a pretty good chance they're going to continue to get 5 or 6 impulses in that turn where it's good weather everywhere. But let's turn it around and see what happens when we get really bad weather. The impulse marker could move up as much as 4 boxes between each impulse. So the axis will go in their first impulse. The marker then moves up 1, 2, 3, 4, and it is the allied first impulse. After their impulse, it will move up another 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the 9 box. Now, it's the axis second impulse. And at the end of their second impulse, there's already a 30% chance that they will end the turn, and the allies will have had a single impulse in that entire turn. So you can see how bad weather really shortens the turns on you. When you're on the attack, short turns are not a good thing. Conversely, on the defense, the shorter the turn, the better off you are. And a lot of that, an awful lot of that, is driven by the weather. I'll just wrap up today's video kind of commenting on the weather patterns of the game. The more experience you get with WIF, the more times you run through a full year and you use that weather chart, you're going to see how the weather changes, at least in general terms, for the different seasons. So just like historically during the war, the Germans launched their major offensives in Russia in the summer of 1941, 1942, 1943, and the Soviets launched their major offensives in the winter of 1941, 42, and 43. In World in Flames, you're going to see that the weather is going to be more conducive at certain times of the year in certain weather zones to one side or the other taking a more active role. A good example of that is in China. South China lies in the north monsoon zone, whereas the central and northern sections of China are in the temperate zone. There's generally bad weather in the temperate zone in the winter, but good weather in the north monsoon zone. Likewise, in the summer, you've got good weather in the temperate, but you've got bad weather in the north monsoon zone. So what happens is the Japanese, to maximize their opportunities in China, should kind of plan on pushing hard up north and in the central areas during the good weather in the summer months, but then in the winter turns, they should switch their focus and try to pick up some ground and put pressure on the Chinese in the south where they'll have good weather. This is just kind of one example, something for you to think about, particularly if you're new to the series and trying to kind of wrap your head around all this stuff. It's one thing to sort of read and understand the rules, the mechanics themselves, but to kind of grasp the implications or the consequences of what that all means. I'll try to drop in little things like this as we move forward through the series to kind of give you some context and maybe some things to think about when you've got this laid out on your table and you're trying to figure out, all right, what do I want to do? What's the best thing? What should I be looking at? So that's it for today and weather. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We'll have our next episode up where we'll discuss supply. Because you can't really do much without supply in this game. And then we'll be getting into the land movement and land combat shortly thereafter. So appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.